Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Beneath the Waves. I'm Matt Silver, and we're here with Dave Hughes. Good evening, Dave.
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone.
This week, we're going to be looking at maintaining and building trusts and relationships in a virtual world and understanding what actually drives each of us. And we're going to be really looking into our values and our trust this evening. So as we enter a digital world, what it is driving each of us to be around in a virtual meeting sense, in a connection sense, in reconnecting with what we're doing and how we're working with each other and the world that we're currently largely working in, which is that virtual world.
So let me start, as usual, with a quick reminder of what we did last week. So if you remember, we focused on us working as teams, and particularly in these times where pretty much everyone's working from home, so we're trying to connect remotely, and the importance of listening in that, and how we're taught from a very young age how to transmit, but we're never really taught how to receive. And we talked about the fact that our view is there's 3 levels of transmission, starting with level 1, which is all about words, tone, and body language. But in what we do and the skill we're talking about here, we're really trying to get much deeper and get behind that and really understand, firstly, the conscious thoughts and feelings that the transmitter is having. But more importantly, if we can really get to the deeper unconscious meaning that sits behind what people are saying. The unconscious thoughts, feelings, beliefs, values, and we gave some examples of how that might come across. And the skill involves, we call it the MAP skill. So it starts with moving your attention to your heart, breathing through your heart. The A is for appreciation. So really appreciating the person who's speaking, listening quietly, not interrupting, and bathing them in appreciation. And then at the end, playing back your sense of the deeper meaning that you felt was being transmitted. And incredibly powerful. I'd love to know if any of you gave it a go during the week, and if so, how you found it. So post any comments on the chat, or we can talk later in the forum about if you've tried it at all and how you got on with it.
Well, I have this week, Dave. Every Friday I have a MAP session with my senior leadership team, and it gives us the opportunity to really connect with each other. And the topic comes up, it's not overly planned in what we do, but it allows us to either debrief something from the week, or something positive that we want to celebrate with the team, or something about the team that we want to celebrate as a collective. And so on a Friday afternoon, we look to do this for an hour within the sessions, and obviously break down who is mapping with who during that time and trying to get that around the whole group. And that's been a lovely way to stay connected with the team during the virtual connection in that sense.
And you started doing that when we first introduced this skill with your team, probably 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah,
I remember you introduced the Friday mapping sessions then, and the team love it.
Well, I think it's part of our new tagline that we're working on is that sense of what we do with Beneath the Waves is give everyone half an hour to themselves. You know, whether you're here to learn, or whether you're just here simply to have half an hour out from the busy hustle and bustle and listen to Dave's dulcet tones soothe your ears. But essentially, this is what we began to do with the SLT on a Friday afternoon. How can we create and really block in? So we call it architecture design of our week. And we really block in the time in which that connection can happen, but the time for ourselves, and enabling us to process a lot of that. And it means that we don't take a lot of it home come the weekend.
So we're going to continue the theme of talking about how we work together as teams. And obviously what's a real cornerstone of a team being effective is trust. You know, that's a very obvious thing to say, but unless people trust each other, you're never ever going to get a team working with the level of openness and mutual support that you need. And trust, in our view, starts with understanding. That is the foundation stone of trust, is understanding. And therefore, it's really incumbent on all of us to take responsibility for understanding someone else's traits. The more we understand each other, the more we trust each other. The more you understand about what are the motives that's driving people, how do they operate, what's their background, etc. It helps you understand why they do the things that they do, why they say the things they do, why they behave the way they do.
And I think what that we're going into tonight with the values for me has been one of the key pieces of learning that I've taken from working with Dave for over a year, and understanding others' values, and therefore understanding where their traits are coming from, has given me a huge understanding of adult development. And as much as we look at child development a lot in education, I think that flow into adult development takes us as leaders, but also as, you know, as practitioners, as teachers, as learning support, whatever that role is, we're better able to understand others, and that removes so much of the friction within the workplace.
So we'll introduce a new model today, which is called spiral dynamics, and it's the model we use at Complete to talk about the value system that each of us operates from. So I'll go through it pretty quickly because we haven't got time to go through it in a huge amount of detail, but hopefully we'll give you a really good flavor of what it is and how we use it. As with everything we do, it's sort of based in some really deep research led by primarily a guy called Claire Graves and a couple of others, and then was taken forward by a guy called Don Beck and Chris, I've forgotten his name at the moment, but who then developed it into this spiral dynamics model. So a few things to remember about the model. It is a model where the higher up the spiral is more sophisticated, and this is really important, but not better. Each of us operates from different value systems, but the higher up doesn't mean you're better than somebody else. And in fact, you know, the most successful people in life quite often operate from the lower value systems, and it takes everyone, it takes teams combined of a mix of value systems to be the most effective. This spiral, this pendulum, swings from sort of an individual focus to a collective focus, back to individual, back to collective. And I'll bring that to life with you in a minute. Your values profile is very situational. So a lot of people operate from a different value system in work versus at home, for example, or if they're thinking strategically versus thinking operationally. And it also evolves over time, particularly if things change. So at this moment in time, with COVID-19, people's value systems may well have changed quite dramatically, and what's important to people at this moment in time. Every level has an upside and every level has a downside, and I'll talk about those briefly. And it's also true for an individual, but it's also true for an organization. It might be true for a school, for example, or an education body. It's true for a country, and it's true for the planet as a whole also. So let me talk about the levels, and I'll go through this quite quickly. And again, please fire in any questions and we can come back to it at the end. But it starts with the color beige. And beige is all about survival. So this is, you know, when a child is born, this is the value system they operate from. All they want is to be fed and sheltered and kept warm and looked after. And, you know, in the early days of humanity, when human beings were hunting and scavenging on their own, it was all about survival. It's all about basic needs. The downside, so the upside of this value system is the focus is on what you need to survive. The downside is there's no real progress. And the downside is what triggers the evolution of the next level in the spiral. So the next level up from beige is purple. And purple is all about safety and belonging. And if you think about the evolution of humanity, this is when people started to come together for the first time and live and work together. for that safety, for the belonging that it brought. So you see quite a lot of rituals at this level. You see quite a lot of tribalism. So you see it in the school playground, you see it in the school staff rooms, you see it in any organization, the sort of silos that you typically get. And there's a lot of positives from that feeling of belonging, feeling of safety. But the downside is it tends not to change. People don't rock the boat. People don't want change. There's no real direction.
And I think you could really ask that question into leaders in education at this point of in the mid-crisis, as it were, are we in survival mode or are we simply looking at safety and belonging? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So as Dave was saying, the first thing that we really want everyone to make sure it happens is that everyone survives. You know, that's priority number one at the moment. Yeah. Then we're looking at the safety and belonging. So just to reiterate that this isn't a hierarchy, you know, so understanding those traits earlier on in that spiral is really important, that you're not comparing it as a lesser if somebody is at that level.
Yeah, and people they might have a predominant value system, but they'll also exhibit several of these at the same time.
Yeah.
As I said at the beginning, it moves from individual to collective. So beige about survival is very much about me, the individual. Purple is about collective. And the lack of direction here is what leads to the evolution of the next one, which is red. And red is all about power. It's about what happens is somebody emerges as a leader, typically very high energy, very charismatic, lots of drive, you know, really motivated by power and ego. And the positives of this value system are gets things done, makes decisions, tends to move very fast, absolutely relentless. So you see a lot of business leaders operating from a red value system. The downside is that it tends to be all about that individual as the leader. So it's my way or the highway. They can lead through fear and become bullies, and they can intimidate and become very egomaniac. And again, you see, you know, this sort of behavior in a school playground as part of the evolution children go through, going from the sort of survival to the safety and belonging, and then the leader emerging, leads the gang or and takes it forward. So that negative of the egomania and the focus on one individual as a leader is what leads to the next level, which is the blue level, and is very much about stability and order. And again, this is red is individual, blue is a collective value system. So moving on from this, so this is a desire for rules and regulations, processes, order. This is where meaning tends to appear for the first time. So people searching for meaning in their life, looking for whether that's a God figure or a government or some kind of authority figure. A lot of people in operating from blue value system, very principled. So lots of positives, and all organizations need this blue value system to build the infrastructure and the processes. But it can become very inflexible. It can become all about the rules and regulations, very rigid, inflexible, and very bureaucratic, which leads to the development of the next value system, which is orange. Orange is very much about success and growth. So it's back to an individual value system. So people who operate from an orange value system are very driven by a goal-driven, achieving targets, achieving success, delivering, you know, quite often motivated by wealth. They can see the value of the rules and regulations from the blue order, but they're prepared to be very pragmatic and bend those rules where it helps them achieve their goals. And again, a lot of business leaders also you see operating from an orange value system. And interesting, a lot of business liveries are orange, representing that value system. So again, lots of positives, gets a lot done, achieves a lot. But the downside is we quite often see of this value system is it can lead to an over focus on winning at all costs, and greed and manipulation. So if you look at what was behind the 2008 financial crisis, for example, it was absolutely the greed and manipulation, the downside of the orange value system that contributed to that.
You've certainly seen that in some of the academy systems that have collapsed from CEOs being paid disproportionate amounts of salary in what they're actually bringing to the academy.
Hmm. Okay, and then we move to green. So out of the downside of orange emerges the green value system. And this is very much about people, and it's about caring. So people who operate from this value system tend to be very inclusive, very much about bringing everyone with them, lots of communication, very focused on caring about people, caring about the planet, caring about communities that they live in. And as I said, do a lot to bring people with them. The downside of this one is that bringing everyone with you can turn into a very slow process. And also people who operate from a green value system can be very judgmental of people who don't share their values, who don't see the world the same way they do, who don't, for example, think, everyone should be equal. So that's the downside you get from the green value system.
And you start to see that pattern from left to right here, Dave, don't you? The descriptors, success, make it happen, survival, all of those have that element of risk in over on the left-hand side, whereas in the collective tends to be a far more stable thing, which makes sense. There's more people, more togetherness.
Yeah.
In that is.
Yeah, and that starts with safety and belonging, and you have the meaning on this side and the caring about not just people, but the planet and so on. So 95% plus of people operate from one or more of these value systems. There's two more, but they're really quite rare. But we're seeing more and more of them, particularly in the sort of leadership roles and the people we work with. The first of those is yellow, and yellow is very much about innovation. So people who operate from a yellow value system are very full of ideas, very disruptive, always looking for change, take real responsibility for what they're doing. So also motivated by learning and continuous personal development. So, lots of positive people in this bring a lot of that idea and disruption. So you see, Barack Obama was very probably operating from a yellow value system, but people like Mark Zuckerberg also, so a lot of entrepreneurs. The downside is they can become too conceptual. So they're great conceptual thinkers, but they can lose people because people don't understand where they're coming from. They don't always communicate in very simple language. So if you're somebody who's red, you find it really difficult to understand where somebody operating from a yellow value system is coming from.
I laugh at that because that's my number one thing I get pulled up on in school is just keep it simple, Matt. Just keep it simple. Don't complicate it.
Yeah, and Matt will talk in a minute about himself and the team, but Matt absolutely operates from a sort of yellow stroke turquoise value system, and that is the potential downside of that. And the last one, the turquoise, here we're really into people who look at system balance and really can digest a lot of complexity, who can compute a massive number of variables and understand how all those variables fit together and how the whole system keeps in balance and the consequences of changing something here for something over here. So very focused on the future, very focused on building a better world and the planet. And as I said, really able to understand that massive complexity. But sometimes because they're so focused on that big picture, big system and the future, they're can be very allowing and very tolerant of people and again have the same thing, that they can be confusing at times because people who don't always get what they're talking about or what their thinking is. So that's a really quick run through the different levels of the spiral dynamics value systems. The way Matt will talk in a minute about how he has used this, how we introduced it into his school and how he's used it. But how we typically use it with teams is we would have everyone do a quick questionnaire to determine their profile. And that shows not just their overall leadership, the value system, but it also shows where do they operate from when they're working on strategy? Where do they operate from when they're working in a very operational sense? How do they lead people? And what's their value system when they're at home or, in their personal life? And
It'd be fascinating right now. How do those values change when you're working from home as opposed to working in your typical setting?
Absolutely. And we see some very big differences. And, there were people in Matt's team who were, for example, very blue at school, but very yellow at home, but weren't bringing that yellow capability into work with them. So you see some real opportunities. So it helps you as an individual understand your own self, your value system and development opportunities, but it really also very powerful in helping you get where other people are coming from. Because what we also do is look at who you typically would sort of move away from or move towards. Who are the people you like to spend time with? And typically you might see a red and a turquoise absolutely not getting each other at all. But by understanding where people are coming from, it really helps build that trust and build that connection in teams. But maybe probably enough from me, Matt. Why don't you talk about how you've used this in school and how it's helped and so on?
Yeah, well, I think the important part is the diagnosis tool that the learning values bring to allow people to first see where they are in that development, and that's what it is really is that maturation, that adult development is so useful. I think it was quite hard for people to digest straight from the off when they first received it. I think everybody sort of thought that they would be top of it. But again, just to reiterate, it's not a weakness to not be at turquoise. You can be where you are and really lean into your strengths and prosper in those areas. I think the other aspect that is important to mention is that you can't skip levels in your development. So it's one level at a time. But what Dave has allowed us to do is understand what is our next step. So if you're already resonating with one of those colours on the spiral, I think you're looking at what's that next step for me. So how do I move from one to another? And I have seen each member of my team take significant steps towards that development, if not achieve that next step of development in being able to do that. So when Dave brought it into the team, it really allowed us to understand each other. And that's really key. So going back to that trust point at the beginning around the U of trust, that understanding, what it allowed us to do was really look into, okay, who are we? But also, where does this come from? Where have we, what has driven us to the next stage of development in our lives? When were we at certain points of development in our own journey? And where do we want to go next? What is it that we want to do next individually, but also collectively as a team? And really, I think looking back, before Dave came in and I built my senior leadership team, I was looking at having different strengths and skill sets on my team anyway. I just didn't know how to articulate it. So I was looking for somebody to come in and run systems and run great systems in the school. I felt I had the innovation for our curriculum design, for example, but I needed the assessment system that was going to back that up. I needed people that were going to be green and bring everyone together and be that central person that does that really oversees the well-being of staff and students in particular, and how do they pull them together. Then I'm going to need people who are red, who are just going to knock down walls and get things done. And I'm not going to drop names in this evening, but everyone on the team knows exactly who they are when I'm talking about them. So they're all getting a nod this evening, but it's a subtle one. But they certainly know their own strengths and what they bring to that team. So I think it's about then understanding the individual journey, and that's where coaching comes into play so prominently in that sense as well. So when we run things like the mapping on a Friday and we're listening to each other, we're able to bounce back from the spiral and have that shared vocabulary, much like the emotions work we were talking about in week 2, Dave. That understanding of the framework brings so much more understanding to where we're at. So we're on a journey as a whole, and we'll come on to look at team development in future weeks, but we're also on individual journeys, and we recognize each other's strengths, but also each other's weaknesses. And that ability to call each other out on that is something that we certainly benefit from as a team. So building the transparency. So the self-compassion task that I will share, we're going to talk about it this evening, but we'll probably run out of time. It's just so powerful to see the transparency of my team mid-crisis. How are they supporting each other and seeing where they're each coming from at this time? And that was something that really showed the true worth of understanding where they are at this point. And have they gone back to their type, or have they stuck with their developmental point? And it's a good challenge to be able to challenge your team with.
So shall we open up Q&A? We've only got a couple of minutes of the sort of main half hour, but as usual, we'll stay on for those that want to stay for another 20 minutes, half an hour, however long you want. But Jessica's asked a question: is there a member of the team that could share how they have found the development? So maybe, I don't know, maybe let's leave that for the forum afterwards, because then some of Matt's team will be in, and if they feel comfortable talking about how they found it and how it's helped them, that would be great.
Elizabeth's point here around it's a lot like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is that where it comes from? So Dave, do you want to expand a bit on?
It's not so. It's not directly where it comes from. Yes, there is some overlap. As I said, I mean, this came from Claire Graves when he developed this. He was a psychology professor in a university in the States, and he just noticed how different groups of his students always used to write essays in different ways, and he was intrigued by why they did this and so on. So that led him into the research that led to this categorization of the value systems and how we as humanity evolve. There's different ways of looking at, it's how humanity has evolved, but it's also about how individuals evolve as a child from birth through all the development stages that they go through and into adulthood. A lot of people stop that development when they reach adulthood, and others continue the development for their whole lives.
So Rebecca's asked, do you think that teams need a mixture of colours?
Yeah, absolutely. Matt said this before. I mean, the best teams, what you don't want is a team of all turquoise or all red, because you don't, everyone's off doing, you don't get that difference, you don't get the diversity. So absolutely, I think you want a team that has people who come from very different value systems.
And I think the diversity really supports where you can go as a team, as long as you can understand that diversity. So if you don't have that central understanding of the values and what each of your values are, and instead you have lots of people who want to do lots of different things, then you can really lose that. Whereas actually what the framework does is bring you together despite your diversity as well. Rebecca's also asked, if all colours have value, do you need to progress to a different colour?
So no, if you're in a team and you've got each of the colours, no. The benefit of developing to another colour is, so if you're at a level, you can operate at all the levels below you. But what's difficult is to be able to operate at a level above you, because you haven't yet had that development that enables you to do so. So the advantage of developing up the levels is it allows you to operate at different levels. And you see great leaders their predominant value system might be green, for example, but they're able to, so mine was green, for example, but there are times, you know, when I worked in the corporate world, I had to be really red because there was a crisis or something that needed a red style of leadership at that point in time, or I needed to be blue for whatever it needed to be. And if you're operating at that level, you can drop into all the other levels below, but it's more difficult to operate at a level above where your development is at.
Okay, so I'm conscious that we've run out of time this evening. If you're interested in your teams having a values profile, I have put in the Complete Coherence education wing website in the chat. So please do click on that if you want to make any inquiries around that kind of values profile. I mean, it's been an amazing journey for us ourselves as a team. So I highly recommend it on Dave's behalf. Thank you for joining us. We've really touched into trust and the values this evening. We're really enjoying the trust that we're building with everyone that's attending each week, and we look forward to you joining us next week on Beneath the Waves.